You good?
We're good. Okay. Okay.
There it is.
My message is called No Means No. And it kind of keeps reminding me of that song by Meghan Trainor. If any of you have all heard it, my name means no, my sign is no. You need to. You. Okay. That's the song I was thinking of, but the truth is that no means no is something that we talk about in a very specific context, but we don't talk about what's really behind it. And I saw this meme a couple months ago. That was the inspiration for this message. Now I'm going to get out of the way to read it for those who can't see it, who are not here, but for those who are here. No means no doesn't only apply to sex. It also applies when your friends say they don't want to drink anymore, when they say they don't feel comfortable with affection, when they say they don't smoke weed. Respecting people's boundaries doesn't only mean when it comes to sex. And I wanted to share when I read that, because how many of y'all have heard my war stories over the years of people who don't respect boundaries? You tell them no, and they do what they want anyway. Or they bully you. I say, we're still on the playground, we're just older. And hopefully we have better clothes. Some of us don't have better clothes. Okay? But the reality is that we're often, many times, still having those same fights that we had when we were kids. No doesn't mean no, no means yes. I had somebody who said that to me once, not all that long ago. I said, I'm not interested in you. Well, why not? Because I said I'm not. I don't need to have a big, huge, long list of reasons why I'm not, because I'm not interested. Well, how do I know when somebody says no, she might really mean yes? I said, because she told you no, you moron. She didn't say yes, she said no. Well, we also do that with God. God tells us no, or God tells us we shouldn't do something, or God gives us very specific instructions, and we still do whatever we want to do, because we like the idea that no doesn't mean no. We like the idea that no means maybe. We don't like the idea that God's going to tell us no. And we kind of are in this world, especially nowadays, where we have unlimited human potential. We can do anything if we try hard enough, if we push it hard enough, if we believe it hard enough, if we visualize it. We don't like the idea that no means no, and that certain things are just not for us to do. God likes boundaries. We read that in the message that my mom read from the reading in Exodus, that the first thing they did, okay, they are out of the Egyptian land, and they're all over the river and through the woods and getting ready to wander around for 40 years the long way, and all of a sudden God says, no, you're not all going up the mountain with Moses. Now, they weren't ready to go up the mountain with Moses. And how do I know that they weren't ready to go up the mountain with Moses? Because every single time Moses turned his back, it was party. Am I wrong? It was, let's go. Everybody take off all your jewelry. I mean, sometimes I think about where their minds went. Moses isn't here, y'all. Everybody get all your jewelry. And they're taking out their nose rings and their earrings and their necklaces. Let's make a golden calf. And everybody went, yeah, this is a great idea. And Moses is still off, and he's going, what is with y'all? I'm gone for 2 days, and you all do that. And then they go to Aaron. You were in charge. Why did you let this happen? Well, I don't know. I just threw all the gold in there, and out came this calf. You know, like, that's just what happens all the time. Like, that's really believable. And I could just see Moses. Okay? But there was an example of boundary. Every single time Moses turned his back, they all started to do something. And they always ran to these idols. They always ran to these gods. Then if we really summarize what they were, as was stated at one of our seminary classes, a lot of them, they were just a big dick, pretty much. They were just worshiping the womb, or they were worshiping different parts of the reproductive anatomy because they thought that would make their crops grow, or they thought that that would make them have a better result, or they thought that they'd get more money, or that they'd be more prosperous. So every time Moses and God need a little personal time, they need a boundary. they're all off doing all that every single time. Then we get into the prophets. They don't like the prophet because the prophet set boundaries, because the prophet set rules, because the prophet said, look, God already had this conversation with y'all. Let's have it again. So that you can keep doing the things and you can get into captivity, and then you can go to captivity. I don't mean captivity, we didn't like you here. We're occupied, we're going to get our own way. We'll do the things, God will do the things. Well, God already knew they weren't going to do the things. And that's why the first thing that they're out of Egypt is God made a boundary. Y'all are not going up the mountain. Y'all are not prepared to see God face to face. Let's not act like you are. Let's not pretend like you're able to handle these boundaries. Let's not pretend like you're really up for this. They probably all would have melted or something real sci-fi. Don't go to the mountain. Don't touch the mountain. In fact, I want to make sure that y'all don't forget. We're just going to put a fence around the mountain. So Jesus was a fence all around the mountain, just so that they wouldn't even touch the thing, because they didn't have the ability to do it. But what happens with people that cross the boundary anyway? Well, they're in Leviticus 10. Now, I really have to say that I enjoy Leviticus 10 because it's actually used by a very famous person who doesn't believe in women preachers, who has a conference against Pentecostalism. His whole conference is against the gifts of the Spirit. And it's called Strange Fire. And I know somebody on Facebook who's down in Mississippi somewhere, who's apostolic, and he says that we ought to do an anti-John MacArthur conference called No Fire. And I said, I am totally in. I said, I will pay. You don't have to pay me to come speak for you. I said, I want to just come and do that and be a part of that. But what's actually being taught here has nothing to do with Pentecostalism. It has nothing to do with the descent of the Spirit. It has nothing to do with spiritual gifts. It has to do with boundaries. And we're going to start in verse 1. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu. Now this is important. They were Aaron's sons. Okay? They weren't Nina Marino's kids. Or my kids, or, these were Aaron's sons. They were there. They knew how to do stuff. They knew the boundaries. Took their censers, put fire in them, and added incense, and they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, contrary to his command. So fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. God ain't playing, y'all. Moses then said to Aaron, this is what the Lord spoke of when he said, among those who approach me, I will show myself holy. In the sight of all the people, I will be honored. Aaron remained silent. Now, I think it's interesting that Aaron remained silent, but I understand why Aaron remained silent. These were his kids. These were his kids that screwed up so bad, God killed them. Okay? Just like that. They didn't do the right thing, and that was it, because they violated the boundary. And what we see happened later on in the Old Testament is that the leaders kept crossing the boundaries. They kept doing the things that they weren't supposed to do. And then what happened? Everybody started doing it. They knew better. Aaron knew better. And so Aaron just stood there and shut up because, everybody said, well, why didn't he stick up for his kids? I would have stuck up if they were my kids. They're gone, first of all. But, if somebody did this, what do you say as a parent? Verse 4, Moses summoned Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, come here, carry your cousins outside the camp away from the front of the sanctuary. So they came and carried them still in their tunics outside the camp as Moses ordered. Then Moses said to Aaron and his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, don't let your hair become unkempt and don't tear your clothes or you will die too. And the Lord will be angry with the whole community. But your relatives, all the house of Israel, may mourn for those the Lord has destroyed by fire. Do not leave the entrance to the tent of meeting or you will die, because the Lord's anointing oil is on you. So they did as Moses said. Then Moses said to Aaron, you and your sons are not to drink wine or other fermented drink whenever you go into the tent of meeting, or you will die. Don't show up drunk to church, y'all. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. You must distinguish between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean, and you must teach the Israelites all the decrees the Lord has given through Moses. So what this is talking about here is a whole bunch of boundaries. And if we understand the law, let's take the sting out of the law. Okay, for a minute. The obeying the law. How do we follow the law? What are we supposed to do with the law? Let's take this sting out of law for a minute. The law was a bunch of boundaries. Mm-hmm. Clean and unclean. Gee, don't play with dead stuff. That was a pretty good rule. I can't believe that God had come down and tell everybody that. Stop playing with dead things. Wash yourself. Don't be gross. Okay? Now we're taking all the sting out of it, all the spiritual stuff out of it, all the follow the law or you'll die. No, some of it was just a good idea. Some of it was stop being gross. Stop chasing after all these gods. Stop trying to be like everybody else. Stop trying to be top dog. Stop trying to have all the power. Stop trying to be God. Stop trying to be the head because you're acting like the tail. Awful lot of boundaries in the Old Testament. That's a lot of what it was about. Hygiene. And the first thing that they did when they went into the territory was they put up boundaries. They put up rock mounds that identified where the nation's boundaries were. Each one of the tribes. They went in and they put up boundaries. And then they circumcised all the men. Now that really doesn't sound like a fun ministry activity for the day. Move some rocks and circumcise all the men. I mean, I'm not going to do that. We're not going to put a banner out there that we're going to do that. But all of those were boundaries. Those were things that they were supposed to do because they established limits between them and other nations and them and other people. And so the whole idea that we're supposed to not have boundaries is totally not biblical. If anything, we're supposed to have them. And we're not supposed to just have them because people are mean or because people are annoying or because people don't do the wrong things. Those are reasons why we do need to have them. We're supposed to have boundaries because they're good for maintaining our faith. Because we are in the world, but we're not supposed to be of the world. Because we are supposed to be in this place where we are spirit-led and we are guided and we are doing all these things that God has for us to do. And we don't have time for mess. We don't have time to play with dead things. Spiritually and literally. Y'all playing with roadkill, we need to talk. But what's spoken of here really clearly, these people were not even to be mourned for by the leaders of the community. Everybody else was allowed to because they had different boundaries and they had different limits. But when it came time, and when we're talking about the limits that were supposed to exist for the Levites, they didn't do the right thing. And so the boundary was that we're not going to hang on and we're not going to think about this. We're going to move forward because we have a boundary. We need to have boundaries for our own mental states. It's like we talk about prayer rooms or having, going in your secret place. That's a boundary. That's a boundary between you and everybody else. And does it mean we don't go to church? No. It does mean, though, that some things that God deals with us about are just between us and God. And we don't involve everybody in that. That's a boundary. It's a boundary when we're dealing with people or relatives and they're disrespectful and they're not respecting the boundaries that we have, that we set them even firmer. It is God that we do this where we separate ourselves from everybody else some of the time. Not because we're better than them, not because we're going to do something different than them, but because we are set apart, because we are here for a purpose, and we cannot reach our purpose if everything goes, if we have no boundaries. Sometimes the boundary, like you said, sometimes is in that form of, you called it self-care, deleting people on Facebook, or not getting into arguments with people on social media. Or sometimes uninstalling the apps from our phone and people not having so much access to us. Sometimes it's not answering the phone right away. Sometimes it's not watching certain things, not because we're not adults and we can't make our own decisions, but sometimes things disturb us or bother us, and we need to have that boundary. We need to have that space between us and other people. Like we talk about Jesus be a fence. Well, Jesus is the fence. We all need to just make sure that we put the fence up. Because a lot of times we like that cow. We want to straddle the fence, and we just kind of want the boundary where we want the boundary, but we don't want to put it up all the way around. Years and years and years ago, a woman who was a part of our ministry, who's not been for some time, used to say that it's very important that we keep our borders neat and tidy. In other words, you cannot have emotional and spiritual and mental mess everywhere all the time and expect that we are going to have spiritual victory. And we are not having victory in the church because we are not abiding by what we sang about in My World Needs You. We either believe that Jesus is the fence or we don't. We either think that we're going to entangle ourselves in the world and not set up boundaries, or we don't. And we can chase after everything in the entire world. We can even do things the best that we think we should do them, just like they did in this passage in Leviticus. They did their best. They thought they would do something that was okay. They thought that they would get away with it, and God said no. And so God sets boundaries. Why don't we? Why don't we think it's all right? God doesn't put up with us. God sets real clear boundaries for us. No. And then we wonder why we do stuff and we don't get the results that we want, or we're in a mess. Well, God said no. God lets us have our experience. You don't want to follow the rules, then be the cow on the fence. Go ahead. God's not going to stop us. But God sets them, why don't we? And why don't we set them with other people? Why don't we set the limits? Why is it such a problem? Because I really believe, I don't necessarily think that God's going to necessarily kill people on the spot. I don't necessarily think that that's something that's going to be done today. But I do believe that we're either in or we're out, like they say they used to say on Project Runway, that 1 minute you're in and the next you're out. We have to make choices, and that's where our boundaries lie. It's in our choices. It's in the decisions that we make. What are we making them for? Why are we making them? Are we making them for us? Are we making them for God? Or are we making them so that we can be seen of people? So that we can be liked by everybody else. So everyone will think we're nice and cute and churchy, and that they'll want to latch on for that reason. You want to know what? It's hard being in a non-binary church in a whole entire world that wants to fall into binaries. But those binaries are our idols. Follow the money. You'll find every idol. Follow the money. Nobody alive would say that they're pro-idolatry, but an awful lot of them are. Just by virtue of not setting the boundaries, because where our boundaries end, that's where our idols start. And that's where we want to chase our idols, and that's where we want to chase all these different things. These two sons of Aaron, their idol was them because they thought they knew better. They thought that they could do it better, and isn't that what we say? Oh, well, they did the best. No, they didn't. No, we don't. We're getting too old to explain to people what we already know that they're doing wrong. And they already know that they're doing the wrong thing. And people are self-aware enough that they know they don't do the right thing. Sometimes maybe we need an explanation, but an awful lot of the time, people know that they cross boundaries. And they know that they test limits. And they do it on purpose because that's human nature. Because it's human nature to just keep pushing that human potential. I can be all this. I can do all this. I can keep going. No, you can sit down, you can be quiet, and you can follow the boundaries because we grow by our boundaries. And God expands territories. But He doesn't do it without still having a boundary there. So, it's Pentecost. The Spirit's alive. The Spirit's always here. I love Pentecost, but the Spirit's always here with us. The Spirit expanded boundaries beyond the immediate Jewish community. The Spirit expands boundaries every time we walk in it, but we still have that boundary and that border there. And it's essential that if we want to thrive, if we want our churches to grow, if we want to just grow as Christians, that we stop straddling the fence and we start walking in boundaries that we establish so that we can do the work that God has for us to do. Because we can't do them if we don't have the limits on what and where we're supposed to be. Okay. Yeah, we good.